Greetings and welcome to the Hourlings podcast project. My name is Martin Wilsey and I'm your host. But today I'm turning it over to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, go for it.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. That was another finely structured episode. See you next time. No. We're going forward in time these days, but this is a time travel episode. And what do you think about time travel? Well, first of all, you have to decide what you want to do in your time travel. And that's what we're going to talk about. First of all, you have to decide, do you think that you can change the past? Guys? What do you think?
First and foremost,
Yeah.
I think whatever you decide to do in your time travel story,
You have the right.
you have to define the rules. You really do have to define the rules right up front,
Right.
and then be consistent about it.
Right.
Otherwise, I only have a certain amount of willing suspension of disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those sets of time travel scenarios is, can you change the past?
So I think that's a great philosophical question for writers or just philosophers or just thinking over your morning coffee.
Oh yeah.
It certainly harkens back to Calvinist principles, predestination, and all that. But I think if you're using this concept in fiction, in writing, I don't see, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see much point to writing a time travel book if the past can't be changed, unless that's like a journey the character has to figure out or something like that.
Yeah, I see that as the case where, the classic trope is going back to kill Hitler. And so some dude invents, a time machine. The first thing he wants to do is go back and kill Hitler.
Right.
And turns out he can't.
Right.
Then he finds out whether the past can be changed or not.
Right. On the other hand, you have wiki history where you can go back and suddenly Hitler's a painter and suddenly Hirohito is
time travel short story, The Sound of Thunder, is about the guy that goes back in past to hunt dinosaurs moments before the meteor impact that kills them all, and steps off the path and kills a butterfly, and it turns out to change everything in the future.
Although, which is a sort of a parallel world, but we won't be discussing parallel worlds today.
Isn't that called the butterfly effect?
That is called
the butterfly effect is a different thing.
What
Butterfly effect is you change a small thing far away and it can impact you in a big way. They say a butterfly in Africa, the breath of a butterfly wings can cause a hurricane on the east coast of Florida.
Really? I thought it was time travel related.
It's a metaphor for chaos theory, where little changes far away can mount up over time and cause something drastic and unexpected from the smallest.
Right. It has been used in fiction. There's a movie with who's that dude?
Yeah.
The Butterfly Effect. That was a good movie. I like that movie.
I hated that movie.
All right, no movies. Come on, we're talking about books and writing here.
Yeah. So can you change the past? Sure. If that's your rules and you're allowed to do that, you can go back.
Maybe you have a deterministic universe. Maybe you're like the time tunnel where you can visit but you can't change, or by his bootstraps where you've predetermined all of your courses of actions.
Yeah,
the Terminator.
Go back in time. You've always gone back in time, and the things that happen have always happened. The best example of that is in Terminator. The future Skynet thought they could change time by sending someone back. It turns out that no matter what they did, it didn't change the time.
Okay. Well, to answer your question, Jeffrey, I don't think you can have a time travel book where your character doesn't at least think they can change the past. I mean, how would that work?
Well, think about this: the trope. You want to go back in time to kill your grandfather, so you try to go back in time. Your gun misfires.
But your character has to not understand that you can't change the past.
You're trying.
I have read lots of books where the characters understand that if they go back in time, they can't change time.
So is it just tourism?
What's
Yeah.
that?
Is it just tourism then?
Like time
Yeah,
travel,
it's-
tourism, yeah.
Tourism. I've seen a lot of stories where they're historians and they want to go back
Mhm.
and see, very significant events in history. And
That's an
knowing that
interesting
they can't
concept.
stop them, knowing they can't change them.
That's
but
an
they
interesting
still-
concept. I like the idea of how that might change academia, because I'm thinking now. I'm a history major, and we always critique each other about our sources. Oh, those are not reliable sources. Oh, this and that. And so, how would that change academia when you have there is no such thing anymore as an unreliable source? You can go back and look at it, right in front of your eyes. That would be interesting, not only to have the character time travel and
Except
experience
I would
that,
go back in time
but
to defend that historical person, so you couldn't see what the truth was.
yeah. And so, how would that change? How would that change the way that the world is understood?
So
I
now
could really see a plot where somebody goes back in time to see if Christ really was crucified
Right.
and then rose. He goes back and he immediately walks into the face of time guardians that don't want him to know,
Right.
because it's all about faith, not about certainty. That's a
Or-
great plot right there.
Or he goes back in time and finds out he is.
or
Sorry for the blasphemy.
or Michael Moorcock, Behold the Man, where he goes back and finds out that he is Jesus Christ and he gets crucified.
Right.
How does that work?
Yeah, boy, that'd ruin your whole day.
Oh yeah.
How did meaning he time travels in pursuit of finding Jesus and then ends up being the one crucified?
Yeah. He ends up
But
being
it was
one
an
of-
accident.
as Jesus. Yeah.
No, it turns out he was Jesus.
Yeah.
But could he actually do all the miracles and everything?
Well, yeah, because he's got he's got
Modern
med kit.
technology. And
Yeah,
time
a lot of
cure for
weirdness
leprosy.
associated with that. So if you can go back and change time,
Yeah.
that's a whole different plot than if you go back and you can't change time.
but
So
you-
I agree with that. I think that you would have to have two different focuses then. If you have one world where the rules are you can change the past and you can do most of your labor of that story in the past or the future, I guess the future. I don't know. We're talking about the past right now. The other alternative to being just a tourist of the past, I think you would dabble maybe a couple of scenes in the past, but I don't see you spending most of your book time there. I see you trying to contextualize and digest the present by going into the past and how that would change the present.
Well, I mean, we'll say this, that generally speaking, if you're going to use the non-deterministic, you can change the past type universe, what you're generally going to end up with is consequences. You go back in time, you've changed some quantum state back then, and then you will not be able to return where you came from. You can only return to the universe you've changed. And that's pretty much-
I read a very interesting time travel book by Stephen King called 11/22/63. And it was a really interesting premise. The time travel method was a doorway into a pantry and a diner in a small town, and he would end up walking out into 1963. And the weird thing about it was everything that happened back then would get reset if he returned to the diner and then came back. Every time he came back to 1963, it was exactly the same moment in 1963, and the future had not changed. Unless he stays there and tries to change it. So this guy, he decides he wants to try to stop the assassination of JFK. I won't give away the book, but it turns out time doesn't want to be changed and puts obstacles in his way.
Yeah.
So time
And that's a perfect
itself
example.
is an antagonist. Like time itself is sentient.
Well, time itself has a reaction to his actions. He was trying to desperately get there and suddenly gets a flat tire. And then the next time he does it, he brings a spare tire with him and the carburetor breaks down, or he gets in a car wreck, or some other shenanigans are stopping him. It's like he's swimming upriver trying to do it. It's a really interesting book.
I've seen that before as a trope. It's kind of the idea that time can be changed, but it's sort of like a river. And if you're at a fast point in the river where something key is going to happen historically, then those events are harder to change than non-critical events that don't have that much
Right.
influence on the time stream.
Yeah,
So
it's like
Doctor Who
it's like
fixed
throwing a
point.
rock into the river. The river still flows down. There may be a few ripples that all even out eventually. But if you drop a boulder in the river, it's going to suddenly divert the river around each side. And then you have two timelines that eventually would come back together, maybe on the other side of the boulder.
It might.
There's a lot of
Time might fix.
premises for it, but whatever you pick, you got to stick with it.
You got to stick with it. But certainly with determinism, you're talking about time, space-time as one continuum. And it doesn't matter if it happened back there 20 years ago or 20 years from now, it's fixed in all of perpetuity.
The problem I don't like with that one, and the time traveler's wife is a perfect example of this. The guy discovers that he is going to die, and there's literally nothing he can do about it.
Mhm.
It's all predetermined.
Right.
And
Yeah,
if
the
you're
same
looking at the
thing with-
ramifications of the books, they're just not that fun to me because they're set. Nothing the character does matters because the train's going down the tracks no matter what.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same with Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And which to me, I read that just recently a few years ago, and it's like, well, with enough drugs, you can, whatever.
Well, I mean,
It's interesting. The Time Wars series of books introduced a concept that I really like called an absolute past. In this one, and I've read several other books that it turns out to be, a detective novel where somebody's trying to figure out their own murder, something like that. But in this, it introduces the concept that I exist separately from time, and wherever I go in time, I personally have had an absolute past. So I could go back in time, tell my younger self something. Hey, dude, in 1979, you're going to find a time machine. But if that didn't happen in my own personal past, I wouldn't remember it. And nothing that happened there, if I got a scar when I was a kid, and you stop this same younger self of you from getting that scar, you're still going to have that scar because you have an absolute past. I really like the idea of absolute past. Or, because it's just magically changing you. Because, what was it, Loopers? Did you see the movie Loopers, where he would scar things into his flesh to send messages to his own self in the future? That's kind of whack.
Oh yeah. No, well, you certainly touched on many interesting topics here. I mean, I would loop. Let's talk about time loops for a moment. I mean, that's a
I love
fascinating
those. A
book.
lot of those have been happening. If you're talking about like Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day, yeah.
Some dude
Doctor Who
stuck in a loop.
Meglos,
I love those plots.
Chronic hysteresis. I mean, that's a great concept. But one of the more interesting ones is the information time loop. That you go back in time, like you were implying there, Marty, and you say, this is how you build the time machine. And now you know how to build the time machine because your future self told you how to build the time machine. So who invented the time machine?
The author.
Absolutely, the author. That's it.
Yeah.
But you can have fun with time loops in those concepts too, to just have information come out of nowhere. And you can allow that in your universe.
Yeah, as
like
long
Bill and
as
Ted, for instance.
As long as your rules remain consistent, could be anything.
Yeah.
It does lend itself well to comedy, though.
Oh, it does. Well, Bill and Ted's.
It does, especially when you can do weird things and then the time loop resets itself, so there's no consequences.
Right, right.
Yeah, the whole Groundhog Day. I just saw this week Boss Level, the same kind of thing. the map of tiny perfect things. That was an interesting one because it had somebody that wanted to stay in the time loop. Very interesting twist on that premise.
Oh yeah, that is
The
very
movie 1201, a very underrated science fiction film that I love. And I think I saw it with it. Did I see that with you, Dave?
Which one?
1201?
I don't think so.
No?
Source code is another one.
Yeah. Source code, that is a great twist on the time loop trope, if you call it a trope. I think it's slowly earning its way to trope.
Now, what I will say about most of the time loop stories is most of them don't explain why the time loop happened or how it happened.
Right.
It's just magical, you know, unless this happens, you don't get out of the time loop, and you got to figure out what this is. The only one I think is an exception to that I can recall offhand is Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise.
Yeah. Well, 1201, which is a great science fiction film that nobody seems to ever watch, but I own a copy. That, you know, was caused by a specific event. Boss Level was caused by a specific event.
Well, I mean, Groundhog Day did have sort of a concept that he had to accomplish something.
Right. But there's
he doesn't know why. It was all just magic to him.
Right. There's no time machine. There's no aliens did it. There's no, you know, it might as well be magic.
Right.
He has to repeat the day until he becomes a better person and finds love.
Well, he's kind of unstuck in time, which is another whole concept of just like being like the time traveler's wife, as we talked about, or Outlander, where you're sort of just bouncing between without any technology, rhyme, or reason.
Yeah, that's Slaughterhouse-5 as well.
Exactly. And it's a fun thing to do, where you just don't worry about the technology. You just go there and you see the past and you learn about it and you interact with it and all of that. It's a very interesting topic. Anyway.
Yeah, I actually love time travel stories. Actually, when I finish this novel, my very next novel is going to be about time travel.
Oh, yeah.
So that's, you know, it's going to be fun for me to work that out. It's really interesting to, you have to be a lot more careful. You always have to know when you are as well as where you are in a complex time travel, because it's got to be consistent. It's got to be right. And it can be fun. It can be really big fun.
Right. Well, let me ask you a more fundamental question. I mean, do you limit yourself to going back in time like Connecticut Yankee and Mr. Peabody from the TV, or do you go forwards in time only like H.G. Wells' The Time Machine?
Well, you have to ask yourself if, you know, if you want to go forward in time and to imagine an advanced civilization and what that might look like, and marvel at it. Just write a science fiction about something set, you know, in another millennium. That's easier. So there has to be, again, an intention with traveling forward with your plot. What those might be, you know, it's up to you. David looks like he has an idea.
So I haven't seen. I think there's some fairly obvious reasons why not. I haven't seen a lot of time travel stories where you travel forward in time. I've seen one book where they did it accidentally and get stuck because the time machine no longer has electricity in a post-apocalyptic future. I've seen it done obviously with H.G. Wells and the Time Machine when he goes forward and finds what he doesn't really like. I have seen it in sort of universe-spanning space opera by Stephen Baxter, where the future consists of a massive universe-spanning war between the species of matter and the species of dark matter about control of the universe and what happens to it at the end of time. But that gets to be awfully remote time travel for most people. I think it's most often people go into the past because it's just kind of the concept of What if you could visit the time of the Romans? What if you could visit the crucifixion and see what happened? What if you could go back to King Arthur's court? Or what if you could go back and hunt dinosaurs? Are all things that people might think about.
Or for that matter, what if you could go back and see your husband before he died?
Yeah, I think that there are definitely the historical appeals, as David was talking about, but I think that it's more just natural human. Regret. Regret is one of the most powerful emotions that we experience, and so I think that's why also you see a lot more time travel into the past.
Yeah.
Well, the novel that I'm going to be writing, I have the outline completed, and in this novel, the protagonist goes both into the future and into the past.
Nice.
That's cool.
And that really lights the fuse, because he goes into the future and the Earth is basically destroyed, and everyone blames him.
Oh wow.
So he's got to figure it out.
Jeffrey,
Yeah.
I also want to talk about the differences between stories where time travel is like very rare and secret and like maybe like covered up by the government, and like there's only one machine in the world, that kind of thing. And also the idea of time travel alternatively, where it's kind of like having a car. The really rich can have one and can use it at, whatever they want to do. And maybe it's licensed, and maybe it's, a little more commercial.
Right.
I think that you have very big deviations there in storytelling,
Yeah.
when it's widely available or when it's like only for very secret, very important missions.
Well, certainly, like a perfect example of the time travel crusader, like Doctor Who, where time travel is somewhat ubiquitous to that character, and he can just go anywhere he wants. I'm trying to think of any good example. Can you guys think of an example where that you have a universe where time travel is sort of this thing that no one believes and nobody thinks that it could be true?
I don't need an example. I just created one. I just suggested it. Think about it. But so there's your example. So what would it be like?
Well, I mean, I'm asking that question because I could use the own example of my Project Chronosphere story, where that is the concept that I have in it, and I was just wondering.
That in your story, it's available very widely.
No, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying it's this
Not available.
clandestine thing.
Yeah.
Because available very widely. I mean, there are many shows where, or many concepts where, yeah, it's wiki history is a perfect example of that. Everyone is just on the time travel board and they're just chatting.
Yeah, the time crusader, or hero sent to fix the thing, is a very common thing. Like 12 Monkeys.
Oh yeah.
Is a great time travel movie,
and deterministic,
with Bruce Willis, and it's a interesting concept associated with that. A lot of times it's a crusader going back, Skynet.
Yeah.
Sending a hero back to protect Sarah Connor.
Right.
There's a short story that I like. I can't remember what it's called, but it's by John Henry, who might be better known as Jack Campbell for his military science fiction writing. But he published a time travel story basically about the Revolutionary War. But it turns out that once time travel is invented, it can't be uninvented. And so at different ages throughout future history, there are different groups going back and trying to change time. So, and a lot of them would like to see the American democracy not succeed. So all the key events of the American Revolution, there are people who are popping in from different future time periods to alter the course of the Revolutionary War. And there are other people popping in to prevent them. And then there are other people to circumvent them, and other people to circumvent people who are circumventing things. And so it becomes almost like a comedy of errors where, there's 6 different groups trying to stop Paul Revere, and there's 6 groups interfering with Paul Revere and stuff.
And nothing changes. It all cancels out.
And nothing changes because they're all canceling each other out and doing everything possible to not be seen or heard or recognized.
And that could be happening right now. There could be people trying to stop this podcast from happening, and others trying to keep it from happening.
To the point where half the people in one of the towns weren't actually locals. They were actually people from the future.
Right.
Who affect something one direction or the other.
Right.
Yeah, I've heard a cool theory that it involves time travel. The theory that people pre-Middle Ages, you know, how there was a lot of documentation and belief in dragons, and so we're wondering, like, what could they have mistaken if there were any genuine sightings and it wasn't all mythology and storytelling? Like, what creature could they have mistaken for dragons? And someone once brought up the idea of maybe it was time travel when they saw a plane or they saw a ship in the sky, and that blew their mind, and they said there's dragons because, you know, think of that big roar of a plane that you hear when it goes over your head. Imagine if you had seen something like that as a farmer in, you know, in 800 AD or something like that. You would have thought,
you're a farmer, and for a moment, a plot of land from the future appears at the end of your farm plot, and here's a locomotive going by,
right,
with its horn, with its steam whistle or whatever,
right,
and then it's gone again, and you're like, oh my God, what did I just see? I saw a dragon.
Yeah.
Dragon, or you saw a giant centipede.
Yeah, it sounds silly, but it's a real theory.
Yeah, and it's kind of the Chinese one.
Fun.
Do it that way.
Could be a story right there.
Yeah.
Chinese dragon versus you know, Shay described the Western dragon, and David just described the Eastern dragon.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
That was my plan.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So, I mean, what other things you guys think in terms of time travel? I mean,
it can get very messy.
Yeah.
So you have to definitely, I would say it lends itself better to plotting. And for me to say that is a big deal because, you know, I'm very big on pantsing.
Well, it also lends itself to research.
Especially historicals.
But more than just that, if you're going back in time, let's say that you want to go back in time to see the crucifixion. Well, how are you going to dress? What are you going to use for money? How are you going to talk to people? There's Aramaic and various other languages.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're really doing time travel for real, you know, there's some prep work.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, I personally, if I had a technology to invent a time machine, I would have, you know, a subcutaneous implant, like a cochlear implant that would automatically translate all languages all the time.
Oh, like the fish.
Problem solved.
Rosier is the concept that I would.
And I would just also
babblefish.
Yeah, well, I call it rosier.
And I would echo my caution from before that if you're interested in traveling into the past, ask yourself why you're not just writing a historical fiction. And if you're interested in time traveling into the future, ask yourself why you're not just writing a science fiction set in another millennium.
Well, I think the Connecticut Yankee is the perfect example of that. You're writing it because you want to put an everyman in the past, or you're putting an everyman in the future. I mean, I think that's the main thing you're doing there.
You want to show the culture clash, or you want the character to learn something about himself by seeing something in the past.
Those are all great. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying just make sure you have, you know, a plot necessity for that.
Or there's a war between those people who want to change the past and those people who want to preserve the current status quo.
And then there's my story, Let's Kill John A. or John Wilkes Booth Must Die, where they just go in the past and muck with time, and they realize, oh, whoops, we shouldn't have done that. You know. So anyway, I do want to finish this discussion with one other concept, what I call the El Reverso. It's the curious case of Benjamin Button, or the cyanide and happiness character, El Reverso, where you're not just unstuck in time, you're flowing backwards in time. That as everyone gets older, you get younger. As everyone learns about knows the past and doesn't know much about the future, you know about the future, but you don't know what's coming up in the past. That concept is a very fascinating, although difficult to execute concept.
Have you seen the movie Tenet?
Tenet, not yet, but I mean, I'm looking forward to that one.
Being unborn is probably the most horrifying concept if you're going to go all the way that far back.
Well, yes, that is true. But now you understand, dear viewer, why I began at the end and as we go to the beginning.
Wow, look at that, came full circle.
Indeed. Now, any final thoughts before I call this meeting to a beginning?
I would end by saying we talked a lot about the past and we talked a lot about the future, but the present can also be time travel. You know, understanding the past in the present and in the future. Working with, I know you don't want to talk about other dimensions in this episode, Jeffrey, but you know, having flexibility in what is now, what is the present.
Right.
That can be a question too.
And we are sitting here on Earth traveling at 1 second per second, although a little bit less because of gravity. And if you go faster than light, you'll travel at maybe 1 second every 2 seconds. But
so my final tip would be just make sure you're consistent. If you're going to do a time travel story, be consistent.
Set up your rules beforehand.
And create a timeline for yourself on a calendar if you need to. But just be consistent. That's my single largest tip.
My biggest tip is if you write a story about going back in time and killing Hitler, I'm going to go back in time and erase you. Just remember that.
Very good.
And welcome to the Hourlings Podcast
for
Project.
Showing up.
Cue the black hole.